But first, so we have today this farce of a summit going on in Canberra, also tomorrow. I'll talk about that in a second because it's even worse than I thought. You won't believe what I'm going to show you. But meanwhile, away from the summit, something far more serious. The Albanese government is driving this country to a complete train smash. In fact, I'll give you a tip. Chris Bowen, our Energy and Climate Change Minister, is this government's most dangerous minister. It's always the same, isn't it, with these people? You know, they dream up these huge new schemes. Their eyes get shiny because their dreams are so big and so noble, and they're so thrilled with themselves. In fact, too thrilled, really, to ask, but how will this actually work? Can it work? And a great example of that, I have to say, a great example was in the Good Weekend magazine last Saturday. It's a big cover story about electric cars, about how, you know, they're going to be our future, just like Chris Bowen says when he says he's going to force us to buy more electric cars, half of our all new car sales in 8 years, by finding ways to ban cheaper petrol ones.
I want to see uptake of electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles at a faster rate as possible, as is practical, and I think having a discussion about fuel efficiency standards will help that along.
Okay, so it's a Good Weekend did this story about how great electric cars were, but the author was honest enough to admit to a hitch when he test drove an Audi electric car, $140,000 plus on-road costs, something for the workers of Australia. Now, let me read the bit. I mean, there's so much of it that made me boggle, but read one bit about what happens when you test the green dream against the practical reality. He says, well, look, the fastest big batteries of these electric cars can charge from 10 to 80% capacity in 22 to 30 minutes. I hope you've got 30 minutes to spare as you're trying to zip somewhere with the kids in the back. And he said, this is the bit that started to affect him, even though he was driving an $140,000 car plus on-road costs. Recently, I stood under an awning at a charging station in a wet and windy Goulburn, waiting for the Audi EV I was testing to put on enough juice to get me to Canberra. Right next to him, by the way, was Sam Wilson from Atlassian. You know, might have heard of Atlassian. You know, Mike Cannon-Brookes, who owns it, multi-billionaire, one of our richest people. He is red hot for green schemes. He's got his poor employee, Sam Wilson, driving an electric vehicle, standing in wet and windy Goulburn, and it's got him. So Sam Wilson stood shivering beside me. He was in a queue for one of the 2 fast chargers, so he was in a queue with a near-flat battery. He needed to get the 200 kilometres back to Sydney. I wonder how long he had to wait in the wet before he was finally charging off. Well, and the author here, Tony Davids, goes on, well, my Audi on a slower charger needed 100 minutes to reach 100%. 100 minutes, more than an hour and a half. I don't know that electric cars are really going to take off like they want, like Chris Bowen was. As I say, that's just one example of what happens when you test the green dream against practical reality. Another, you just look at California. Now, 1 week ago, it said, well, sales of petrol-driven cars, they're going to be banned by 2035, a sort of ban that the Labor government here is edging towards. But just 4 days after it said that, it was already so short of electricity on a hot day that it told Californians to avoid using large appliances and charging electric vehicles. So they want to make more people drive these electric cars when they already don't have enough electricity, and before they've worked out how they're going to get enough for all the other electric cars that are going to come along. That's happening here too, folks. And if you think, well, no. Green politicians surely cannot be that dumb. I say again, 2 words to you, Chris Bowen. Because there was some hugely worrying news this week. A few days ago, a man called Paul Broad, he quit as head of Snowy Hydro, which gives us hydroelectricity. And one reason that he quit, he says, is that Chris Bowen wouldn't listen to him. He would not accept a basic engineering problem with his green plans, one of the key elements of it. Now, Bowen, and the Albanese government, he wants us to get rid of even more of our coal-fired power stations, right? That's these higher emissions targets they've put in. Drive them out. 82% renewable. We've lost a third of these coal-fired power stations already, by the way, and he wants us to go green, wind and solar. But of course, when you do that, you do need a lot more backup for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, so your lights don't go out. Now, coal plants can't do that. You can't switch them on and off like you can with gas. So, Labor finally agreed to the Liberals' plan to build a new gas plant at Kurri Kurri that we need desperately. But it had a big catch. This new plant could not run on gas, as the Liberals had wanted, because it's a fossil fuel. It had to run instead on green hydrogen by 2030. That's green hydrogen. That's the new big thing that's going to save us. The trouble with green hydrogen is that you make it by running huge amounts of electricity through water. And no one actually has made this work at scale. You get from this a highly explosive gas made of molecules so small that they tend to leak from most pipes. So that's another huge issue. You can't just pipe it in into your kitchen or your gas heater and think, because otherwise, boom. So, and in fact, by the way, BlueScope Steel has just cancelled a planned test smelter in Port Kembla that it wanted to test with hydrogen. And it said, well, look, in fact, green steel, which is steel made with this green hydrogen, still decades away. We're nowhere near it. Well, this is what this Paul Broad, the head of Snowy Hydro, who had to quit a couple of days ago. See, Snowy Hydro's in charge of this Kurri Kurri project. He tried to tell Minister Bowen this. As he told the ABC later, look, while hydrogen is a wonderful opportunity, it's many, many years away from being commercial. In fact, to think that you can have hydrogen running into Kurri Kurri when there is no hydrogen being produced in Newcastle just doesn't make any sense. Okay? So there it is. You've got Chris Bowen wanting to get rid of coal-fired power stations and wanting this crucial backup plant to use hydrogen that isn't being made in the vicinity at all, using technology, by the way, that can't even yet handle it. And I haven't even talked about the cost. Now, in a sane world, of course, you would think that your Minister for Energy and Climate Change, Chris Bowen, would say, oh, look, I hadn't even thought of all that. I apologise. All right, my dream of a hydrogen-powered plant at Kurri Kurri by 2030, clearly it's got to go. It's not going to work. Instead, it's the expert who tried to warn Bowen. He's the one going instead. How does that work? It makes me think, how many other global warming projects promised by this government, and it's promising a lot, how many others won't work, can't work, will be too late? I've already told you early this week how these transmission wires are running like, 150% over budget in just 4 years already? So how many other experts is Chris Bowen ignoring in this mania? So it seems to me we have a climate change minister who treats his green dreams as more real than the engineering and the physics and the economics that all say it can't happen. And that's something to think about, particularly if you're standing there in the rain and the cold for 100 minutes waiting for your electric car to charge.